After transmigrating into a book, I successfully saved the mute, pitiful supporting female character. We came to understand and cherish each other, promising a lifetime together. However, just when I thought we would grow old happily together, an unexpected fire broke out. To my shock, she ignored my plight and fled with her true love right before my eyes, leaving me to be consumed by the flames. After perishing in the fire, I became a wandering spirit, vowing to curse her into a life worse than death. Stuck as a ghost, I found myself bound to Victoria, unable to leave her side. I tried countless times to break free from her, but every attempt was thwarted by an invisible barrier that would throw me back. Eventually, after repeated failures, I accepted my fate of being tied to Victoria. Wherever she went, I floated along. On a silent night under a sky full of stars, Victoria sat quietly at her desk, typing away at her novel. The blue glow of the computer screen highlighted her gentle features, serene as distant mountains. Her delicate fingers danced over the keyboard, revealing a burn mark on her wrist from when she saved Ethan 3 days ago. 3 days ago, at the same time, in the same shopping mall, I lost my life. Fire and smoke raged, and despite being just a few meters away, she didn't hear my calls. Instead, she covered Ethan with damp clothes and ran out with him. I was unlucky. As the fire spread, a falling guardrail pillar struck my right foot, leaving me in excruciating pain and unable to move. Ethan was knocked down by the panicked crowd not far ahead of me. I gritted my teeth and propped myself up, shouting, "Ethan, I'm here." But in the next moment, a familiar figure appeared before me, one I had watched for nearly a decade. It was Victoria. Her presence calmed me instantly, and I exhaled deeply. However, she didn't see me first. She rushed straight to Ethan. Sweat dripped from Victoria's forehead as she struggled to pull him up. I called out, "Victoria!" Smoke invaded my senses, and in the oppressive heat I covered my mouth, unable to make a sound. All I could do was shake the large orange bell on my wrist frantically. The clear sound of the copper bell rang intermittently, blending into the chaotic cries and screams around us. But Victoria didn't stop. Her small frame trembled, yet she kept her eyes fixed on Ethan. This foolish girl, how could she not hear me? I thought numbly. Amidst the roaring flames, another fragment of the building fell. I clutched the bell, strength waning. The last sight I saw was Victoria leading Ethan away, leaving me behind. The fire spread, burning brighter and hotter. I don't know how long passed before the smoke obscured my blurred vision, and the world went completely dark. A salty taste lingered at the corner of my lips. Even in death, I held onto the bell. It was a gift from her on the day I was leaving to study abroad. She had smiled shyly, cheeks flushed, and tied the cute cat bell on my wrist herself. Victoria was mute, unable to speak. She gestured clumsily, telling me not to find another woman, and if I missed her to shake the bell, and she would know. She promised to always be by my side. At that time I laughed and said, all right, I promise. But little sister, are all you literature majors this sentimental? You're really reeling me in." After I returned, we were never apart again. But 3 days ago, Victoria broke our promise for the first time. As death loomed, a cold electronic voice echoed in my ears. It asked, "Do you regret it, host?" It was the system responsible for transporting me to this world to win over Victoria. After succeeding in the mission, I chose to stay in this world to grow old with Victoria. The system said, "I can't save you in this world. After your body dies, your consciousness will remain until you return to your original world. Additionally, I can grant you one wish within my power." Victoria deleted the novel she had spent the entire night writing. Clearly, she was not in a good state. Her short stories were famous, and when we argued, she'd write revenge stories to vent. When I coaxed her back into a good mood, she'd write sweet stories to warm her readers. She was diligent, often refining a single chapter 4 or 5 times before moving on. In the past, when she was stuck without inspiration, I would let her sit on my lap, gently hugging her from behind, helping her clarify the characters' personalities and values, and slowly unravel the possible directions of the plot. Sometimes, when her perfectionism kicked in and she refused to sleep until she finished writing, I'd make her coffee and prepare midnight snacks, staying up with her. Now I watched her coldly, seeing her struggle to the point of tears, yet feeling no sympathy. Floating in front of her, my hollow eyes reflected my hatred. I gritted my teeth and said, "You heartless woman, I treated you so well. Do you think you deserve me? I curse you never to have a good end." Of course, Victoria couldn't hear the words of a ghost. She pouted, picked up her phone, and opened a chat app. At the top of her friends list was Sin. Sin was me, Sincere. I hadn't replied to her messages in 3 days. Tired from floating around the room, I sat at the table, curious to see what she intended to do. As I watched, Victoria suddenly smiled. She reached out, touched my puppy avatar with her fingertip, and her lips curled into a slight smile. Victoria tapped Sin on the head and said with a teasing smile, "Poke your dog head." She messaged him, "When you're not too busy, can you give me a call?" A moment later she added, "Let me know you're okay." "All right." After waiting for a long time without a reply, Victoria considered starting a video call but hesitated and then closed it. Before leaving for my business trip, I had told her that this trip would be hectic, with demanding clients requiring me to be on call, so I might not be able to reply promptly. I also asked her to inform me before calling and not to call unexpectedly. After a while, she couldn't resist and poked my profile picture again. "Victoria tapped on your coffin lid and said, 'Wake up and say hi.'" I floated on the ceiling with my phone, laughing mischievously to the point of tears. Yes, having control over the phone was my last wish granted by the system. Initially, I wished to separate my soul from Victoria, but the system said it was impossible. For reasons unknown, I wasn't curious about Victoria's reaction to the news of my death. Whatever she showed, regret or pain, I found it repulsive. She hesitated for a moment, her worried frown relaxing, and then covered her mouth with a soft laugh. She messaged, "Brother, that's not a good omen." Victoria rested her chin on her hand, thoughtfully searching for the right emoji, and sent an image of an angry dog being petted. She wrote, "Miss you." I floated midair, pinching her cheek, laughing heartily, but as my smile faded, my expression turned cold and indifferent. I muttered to myself, "I'm truly sorry, Sincere is already dead. How can a dead person return your calls? Don't you remember? I'm just a meter away, yet in the face of life and death you couldn't see me. I was your boyfriend, Victoria. I won't forgive you unless you die too." This was my 4th day as a ghost, stuck by Victoria's side. Her life was simple, sending me good morning messages, writing novels, eating, sleeping, and sending me good night texts. Lately, she seemed increasingly agitated, constantly editing and deleting her writings, leaving a mess of discarded drafts. One night, Victoria woke up from a nightmare, her sudden movement waking me too. Annoyed, I wanted to pull her over and tease her, but I could only grab at empty air. Frustrated, I rolled over to sleep again. I don't know if other ghosts need sleep, but I, Sincere, certainly do. Alive, I was the king of resting. Dead, I still needed my sleep. Victoria leaned against the headboard, perhaps having had a nightmare, her breathing rapid, face pale, and body covered in cold sweat. She couldn't speak, only gasped for air, while her dim eyes showed a trace of loneliness. She messaged, "Sincere, miss you." My phone received her message once again. Victoria wiped her eyes, took out a photo of me from her nightstand, and looked at it for a long time before she couldn't resist calling me. After several busy signals, the call was disconnected. She held the hem of her dress, pacing the room, her profile strikingly beautiful but her face filled with worry and confusion. Her pupils shimmered, like a deep, clear lake rippling gently. Those eyes were still as beautiful and captivating as when I first met her, unchanged. It took me 10 years, chasing her for a decade, to finally see my reflection in those distant, cold eyes and to feel a hint of warmth in her gaze. I thought Victoria loved me, but unfortunately, in life and death moments, true feelings surface. Long-term companionship couldn't compare to the white moonlight she had cherished for years. Victoria, oh Victoria, how could you not notice me standing right in front of you back then? Was Ethan your only true love etched into your bones? As long as he was around, no one else existed in your eyes. Am I sincere, forever destined to be a supporting character? It's strange, I didn't know ghosts could feel pain. This was my first time as a ghost and I didn't understand. I touched my heart where it once beat fervently at the sight of Victoria. Now it was empty, nothing but ashes. Victoria sent me messages every day, and though I was a ghost, the system allowed me a loophole to reply, but I chose not to. I amused myself by creatively altering the poke messages to tease her, floating around the room and having a great time. Victoria poked your wooden fish, sincere's merit plusone. Victoria patted my former gravestone and lit incense. She poked our red string of fate, accidentally snapping it. Victoria's eyes lowered slightly, pondering my changing messages for a long time before cautiously sending, "Brother, did I do something wrong? Damn it." I was furious. Did she do something wrong? This heartbreaker acting all innocent. I flashed in front of her, baring my teeth and making a genuine ghost face at Victoria. Then, with a swift motion, I tried to slap her, as slapping was my forte. But my hand swiped through the air, almost making me tumble. Speechless, I realized that even as a ghost, I couldn't slap anyone anymore. I gritted my teeth and shouted angrily, "Vicky, don't call me brother. Your brother is Ethan." Victoria's brow furrowed, and despite the summer heat, a sudden chill crept in. She couldn't help but shiver. Shivering slightly, Victoria took a sip of warm water, changed out of her nightgown, and tied up her hair. It was the first time in 4 days that I saw her leave the house. The shopping mall was filled with a romantic atmosphere. Today was Valentine's Day. The diamond pendant I had prepared for her was still hidden in a secret compartment in the study, and I never got the chance to give it to her. Because I don't have a Valentine's Day, only a Memorial Day. I floated along behind Victoria, watching her follow a store guide to pick up a pre-ordered strawberry cheesecake. Victoria loved strawberries and I loved cheesecake. In previous years we would buy it to share, but this time she was probably buying it to share with Ethan. Thinking of this made my anger boil over, and I furiously tugged at her ponytail. Scumbags, the both of them. I hope they eat it and get food poisoning. Victoria was oblivious, just thinking the mall's air conditioning was too cold. She frowned slightly and carefully put away the cake. She then entered a men's clothing store. Communication issues made Victoria rarely step out, so today was an exception. My hollow gaze felt a sting of sadness. Victoria was meticulously choosing clothes, typing on her phone and gesturing at the sales assistant, seemingly describing Ethan's style. It made me want to tear the store apart. I raged silently, trying to mimic a famous actor's stern refusal, but all that came out was air. Busy with my futile efforts, I missed the words on Victoria's screen. She wrote, "Male about, very thin, fair-skinned, loves to smile, likes blue. A gift for a loved one." The sales assistant smiled warmly, saying, "You must really love him." Victoria's eyes, usually so clear, softened. She wrote, "Thank you. He is worth loving." Victoria didn't go home. She went straight to the city hospital. After buying a gift, it's logical to deliver it to the person. Logical, my foot. "Victoria, do you even remember that I, Sincere, am your boyfriend? When I first turned into a ghost, I floated high. But today, I couldn't float anymore." I slumped in a corner outside the hospital room, eyes closed, ears covered, feeling desolate. When I was first transported into this world by the system, I was a tough guy, uninterested in the romance of this book. The system set me as a minor character unrelated to the main plot, a wealthy heir. I was a wealthy person in the real world too, so I wasn't attached, just wanting to finish the storyline and return to my comfortable real-life days. Yet fate twisted, and the moment I met Victoria, I realized love at first sight wasn't a myth. I was 19, and Victoria was 18. Her long black hair and bright eyes were strikingly beautiful. I was entranced with only one thought left. I, Cincy, must win her heart. She will be my future wife. I tried every romantic move in my mind before I started asking around. That's when I learned Victoria was mute. I heard she had a high fever as a child, and her family was too poor to get timely treatment, leaving her unable to speak. Further inquiries revealed good news: Victoria was unmarried. Bad news: she had a first love, Ethan. Good news: Ethan was the protagonist, and Victoria was just a supporting character who loved in vain. Bad news: Victoria deeply loved Ethan. Sigh, the male and female leads were mutually in love. What was a poor supporting character like Victoria doing getting involved? After thoroughly studying the plot the system provided, I was confident in my strategy to win Victoria over. My character, Sincere, was designed to be especially lovable, so I was determined to win Victoria's heart. I first got close to Ethan, becoming his good friend, and through him, naturally met Victoria. At that time, Victoria and Ethan had already broken up. Ethan had met his dream girl, Sophie, the heiress of the Comfort family. They were embroiled in a mutual love-hate entanglement. Victoria, still deeply in love with Ethan, waited patiently for him to return to her, despite their breakup. She couldn't speak, had a humble background, and didn't dare ask for much, yet she couldn't bear to leave. Whenever Ethan and the main heroine quarreled, Victoria would avert her eyes after a glance, waiting silently on the sidelines. The main heroine's character was that of a spoiled heiress, and before she matured, she was quite arrogant and willful. Out of jealousy, she often humiliated and oppressed Victoria. Victoria, an orphan with a poor background, was no match for someone like Sophie. She endured all injustices silently, loving Ethan with all her heart, never uttering a word of complaint. What a pitiful, deeply loving soul. My first official meeting with Victoria was at my birthday party. Miss Sophie and Master Ethan came to my family's party. Victoria was set up to make a fool of herself at the banquet. Sophie deliberately sent Ethan away, holding her glass high with a cold smile. She said, "Victoria, look at you trying to play Cinderella, sneaking in to catch a wealthy husband. Have you thought about it? If you ruin Sincere's birthday party, you won't have a good outcome." The crowd surrounded Victoria, pointing and gossiping. The girl, simply dressed and slender, couldn't speak to defend herself. Tears welled up at the corners of her eyes. With a tinge of grievance in my brows, I dressed up in a tailored suit, instantly transforming into someone of significance. People do say clothes make the man. I adjusted my hairstyle and watched, thinking to myself in the mirror, looking this extravagant, how could Victoria not throw herself at me asking for support? However, as I descended the stairs, I found Victoria being humiliated by someone. I immediately clenched my fists, furious. Who dared to bully my wife? Loosening my blue tie, I stood at the edge of the crowd and asked, "What are you doing?" Men and women approached with compliments, but I ignored them all. Pretending to meet Victoria for the first time, I walked up to her and politely asked, "Miss, who are you? What's your name?" Observing my wife up close, I could hardly restrain myself from carrying her off to the registry office. This girl was as beautiful as a fairy. Controlling my excitement, I smiled and said, "My name is Sincere." Victoria paused slightly, nodding with a hint of indifference. I was speechless. I took her hand enthusiastically and said, "I'm a friend of Ethan. You're friends with Ethan too, right? Then we're friends from now on." Receiving Cincy's favor, envious glances were cast in Victoria's direction. Sophie, with a meaningful gaze, glanced at me and sneered, "She really is lucky." Victoria gently brushed off my hand, remaining calm as her gaze swept over me, leaving no trace like water. Unimpressed by my overtures, not discouraged in the slightest, I continued introducing myself with passion. I said, "You can call me Sin. Victoria, I find you very pleasing to the eye. I like you." Victoria remained cool and distant, pulling out her phone to type a few words on the keyboard. "Hello, have you seen Ethan? I'm here to find him." She was worried, her mind occupied with Ethan. Grinding my teeth, I smiled even more brightly. After the party, Sophie sneered, "You've taken a liking to her, huh? Our families have been in the same social circle since childhood, but we only have a general acquaintance. I didn't hold back. Victoria is my future wife. If I hear you're after her again, don't blame me for turning hostile. Sophie didn't expect me to be so direct. She snorted. Wife? Who would believe that? People like you just play around when you meet someone you like. But Cincy, how does it feel to love someone who doesn't love you back? I couldn't be bothered to argue with her. You want everyone to suffer just because you're miserable. Which rich kid dumped you that you're coming to me with your complaints? Sorry, I don't have time for your sob stories. In the first 18 years of Victoria's life, Ethan was the only one who treated her well. They grew up supporting each other in an orphanage. I understood the bond and friendship between Victoria and Ethan. I envied it but wasn't jealous. Regardless, Victoria's future would certainly include me, Sincere. I was determined. I wanted to be part of her life. After that, I pursued Victoria relentlessly. I learned sign language for her, orchestrated various accidental meetings. Victoria was a very shy girl, but that was okay. I was shameless and persistent. Those were my strengths. On New Year's Eve, Victoria was alone in her rented apartment. I knocked on her door and, while she wasn't paying attention, barged in. I'm starving. Hurry up and clear the table. I brought a feast, I announced. Victoria, I like you. I think you were born to be my wife. What do you think? I can't stand seeing you with anyone else. What do you think of me? I'm confessing my love for you. Victoria probably never expected a rich heir like me to be so boisterous. As the clock struck midnight, I used sign language to wish her a Happy New Year. A bright smile lit up her face, reflected in Victoria's eyes. And so I pursued Victoria for years until a crisis hit the Sincere family, and I was sent to study abroad. At the airport, Victoria pushed through the crowd, running breathlessly. Her usual cool and detached demeanor disrupted. Her eyes were red as she tightly grasped my hand, signing, I like you too. Victoria liked Sincere too. It proved that I had succeeded. I thought if it weren't for that unexpected fire, Victoria and I would be together for a long, long time, until we grew old together. When Victoria came out of Ethan's hospital room, I was filled with resentment, puffing my cheeks and blowing out cold air. Sophie, pretending to be gentle and virtuous, softly said, Thank you. Years had passed, and this green tea girl had become more restrained. After a moment of hesitation, Sophie, still unsure, asked, You won't betray Sincere, will you? Victoria said nothing, a glint of coldness in her eyes as she signed no. Sophie breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. Where's Sincere? Why didn't he come with you? Victoria seemed about to answer when the phone in her pocket buzzed. She immediately checked the screen, a slight look of confusion flashing in her eyes. She gestured to Sophie and quickly left. I should have been cursing Victoria quietly in a corner, but as she left I was dragged away, gritting my teeth and floating sideways. Bastard! I was just cursing Ethan. Don't interrupt my spell, I muttered. Victoria approached my colleague who was on the same business trip with me. Scratching his head, the colleague said, Sin came back a while ago, on the same train as me. Victoria's brows. Her brow was tightly furrowed, her eyes like turbulent lake waters, revealing the unrest within her heart. Her pale lips pressed tightly together as her breath inexplicably became rapid. Victoria took a deep breath and asked, Excuse me, when did Sincere return to New York? Her typing fingers trembled slightly. The reply came from the other side. 4 days ago. Hearing this, Victoria's face suddenly turned ashen, her pupils filled with shock and confusion, frozen in place, her lips slightly parted. I stood in front of her, rubbing my forehead, and poked her head, saying, Hey, I'm here. I waved my hand in front of her eyes, sneering, You looking for me? What now, Victoria? Why don't you just die too? If you die, you can see me again. Countless messages and calls flooded her phone. Realizing something was wrong, Victoria finally started looking for me. She was mute, unable to speak or leave voice messages. Her calls wouldn't go through, so she kept messaging me nonstop. Brother, where are you? I shook my head, saying, I'm right beside you. You've just been blind all along." She asked, "Brother, can we go home first? I'll come find you." The word home struck a fragile nerve in me. I paused for a moment, then slumped against the wall not far from Victoria, clenching my fists, speaking each word deliberately. "Victoria, I can't go home anymore." Victoria went to my office, to my parents' house, to any colleague or friend remotely connected to me, to every place she could think of, yet she still couldn't find me. Amidst the bustling city streets, Victoria stood in the crowd, clutching her phone tightly, looking somewhat lost as if she didn't know where to go. Her weary shadow stretched long under the streetlights, adding a sense of distant loneliness. Her eyes were bloodshot, looking utterly exhausted. After a day of running around, Victoria returned home after being awake for 24 hours, searched every corner, and was disappointed once again. The whole house was lifeless, unusually empty and quiet. Victoria continued to contact me, gently tapping on my profile picture. She poked Sin and said, "The grass on your grandfather's grave is already 8 feet tall." She stared for a moment, then suddenly her fingers slid upward, reviewing every change in my status updates. I stood behind Victoria, suddenly losing interest in everything, not even wanting to scare her anymore. I could see it, Victoria didn't have no feelings for me, but sadly, I wasn't the person she loved the most. I moved in front of her, standing still, watching her. Victoria's brows were slightly knit, her lips pale and cracked, her face showing fatigue, yet she remained elegantly aloof. Memories flashed through my mind like a carousel. The first year, Victoria's indifference and distance towards me. The second year, Victoria would inadvertently gaze at me, her eyes lingering on me longer and longer. The third year, during a snowy winter, I crossed mountains to find Victoria sketching outdoors, warming her icy hands in the snow house. The fourth year, at the airport, Victoria, out of breath and no longer as cold, tied a bell on my hand, promising she would always wait for me, even if it took a lifetime. The seventh year, I carried her to the bedroom, her cheeks flushed as she shyly nestled against me. Closing my eyes, I murmured calmly, "System, end it. How many days until I can disconnect?" The electronic voice replied, 3 days remaining. Ding! The screen lit up. I sent Victoria a message on my phone. "Let's break up, Victoria. I've found someone new. I don't want you anymore." Suddenly, Victoria's fingers froze. Her brows furrowed and her eyes, once two clear pools of autumn water, abruptly turned to ice. Victoria called the police. Furious, I jumped up and down, shouting, "I said break up, don't you understand?" "Why are you calling the police?" Victoria filled out the report, tightly clutching my photo, trying hard to control her emotions. I could feel her breathing was erratic, seemingly calm on the surface, but nearly out of control. The police asked, "He can still message you. Are you sure he's missing?" Victoria's eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion. She typed, "Sincere wouldn't break up with me. Something must have happened to him. He's not safe now. Please, save him." After recording her statement, Victoria wasted no time and got up to leave, apparently to continue searching for me. Just as she was about to exit the police department, a voice called out, "Hey, wait a minute, ma'am." A young officer, after staring at my photo for a long time, suddenly changed his expression and called out loudly to Victoria. In the next moment, his voice became very gentle and cautious. "Ma'am, is this the person you're looking for?" Victoria followed the direction the officer pointed, standing quietly, her gaze fixed on the figure in the bottom left corner of the screen, her expression momentarily blank. I turned my head in confusion and saw a familiar figure in the bottom left corner of the screen. It was me. There was a raging fire, a panicked crowd fleeing, me shaking the bell and calling for help desperately, and Victoria, eyes straight ahead, pulling Ethan away. The scene playing was the arson incident at the mall 4 days ago. For a long time, Victoria seemed to be in a daze, her blood drained, her face as pale as paper. She opened her mouth, and from her long silent throat, hoarse and raspy words squeezed out unclear. "Brother." Her voice was sharp and unpleasant, like a saw cutting through broken strings. as if the whole world was trembling and turning upside down. Victoria, without eating or drinking, tirelessly remained in the fire. In front of the post-disaster ruins, she searched for me for a long time. I floated at her shoulder, making faces like a ghost, indifferent. I sighed and said, "Stop looking for me." I died without leaving a body. Her expression remained as calm as ever, asking everyone she met, "Have you seen Sincere?" in her sharp, grating voice, struggling to get the words out. The news of my death could no longer be concealed. Friends from my life came to mourn. Sophie and Ethan, who had just been discharged from the hospital, also came to the sealed-off ruins. I was speechless, thinking how lively it was with everyone coming to pay their respects. My parents were the most heartbroken, sobbing to the point of choking. Even Sophie, who never got along with me, couldn't help but shed a tear. Only Victoria didn't cry for me. The girl stood quietly, her eyebrows soft and distant, with a few scratches on her fingers, dried blood mixed with fresh. Ethan, looking guilty, said, "Victoria, I'm sorry, don't do this." Victoria turned her head slightly and softly asked, "Have you seen Sincere?" Ethan looked at her, bewildered and incredulous, asking Victoria, "Since when could you speak?" Victoria didn't answer, lowering her eyes, murmuring to herself, "I haven't seen him." Her mouth opened and closed, voice unclear, as if her throat was filled with gravel. "It must hurt. Brother must have been in pain. I came to bring Sincere home, but I couldn't find him. On the 7th day after my death, it was Sincere's funeral. Victoria didn't attend, which was just as well, since I didn't want to hear the sobs of those who loved me or see the cold disdain of those who hated me. I lay in bed planning to take a long sleep. The system told me that once I woke up, I could return to the real world. My mind and body gradually became peaceful. Unexpectedly, Victoria stood at the foot of my bed and suddenly lifted the blanket, lying down without warning. My eyes widened in anger and I shot up, flying out with a whoosh. I was speechless. "Hey!" Victoria lay on my usual side in my spot under my blanket, shamelessly burying her head into my pillow, fingers repeatedly stroking it. I was dumbfounded, angrily scolding, "Vicky, do you have to disturb even my last sleep?" Victoria lay silently on the bed, a faint blush spreading to her eyes, her gaze dimming. Her head was buried low, clutching something in her palm, gritting her teeth, lips trembling as she repeatedly called my name. I floated to the bedside, looked away after a while, finding it all absurdly funny. I said, "Victoria, what is this? A confession? Late affection is cheaper than grass. Besides, given another chance, you'd make the same choice. Admit it, you're just a Vicky." Muttering this conclusion to myself, I felt inexplicably bitter. Thankfully, I was about to be free. Sincere would be reborn, and in his new life, there would be no Victoria. Victoria slept restlessly. After a while, she got up to the kitchen to cook a plate of dumplings, the ones I had haphazardly made before a business trip. I was forced to follow her to the kitchen, momentarily stunned. Suddenly, I recalled the time we had a fight. That winter solstice, on a whim, I left work early to surprise her with some romance, making a plate of dumplings myself. They ended up looking like boiled buns. She looked at the things that neither resembled buns nor dumplings, with a troubled expression, reluctant to eat. I was furious. I had put in effort step by step, mixing the fillings, seasoning, rolling the dough, wrapping them, and cooking each one. Not eating even one was a real slap in the face. Where would my pride as Cincy go? In my anger, I fed the cooked filled dough to the neighborhood stray dogs, saying, "Better feed them to dogs than let you eat." However, the dogs didn't eat them either, just sniffed and walked away wagging their tails. I was furious. Victoria brought the dumplings back, using sign language to say, "I'll eat them." My thoughts returned. Victoria served 2 plates, even calmly setting my bowl and chopsticks on the dining table. She slowly ate the dumplings, one by one, smiling at the empty seat across her, saying, "Brother, they're delicious." Feeling conflicted, I gritted my teeth and said, "You're crazy." Victoria washed the dishes and stared at the phone on the table, her gaze lingering on our chat window for a long time. After a while, she suddenly smiled softly, speaking to the air where I was. Sincere, you've always been by my side, haven't you? I was startled, instinctively hiding behind the couch, afraid Victoria might call in an expert to banish me, preventing my return home. Victoria picked at her fingers, staring blankly ahead, surrounded by sorrow. She looked up and smiled dryly. Sincere, wait for me. I slowly stepped back, trying to distance myself from her, urgently calling the system. I asked, System, can I leave now? The system replied, detection indicates the host has been deceased for 7 days. Initiating departure now, a cold electronic voice counting down. 3, 2, 1. Victoria sat with her head down, utterly silent. I took one last glance at the girl, turned away without hesitation. In an instant, the cold aura surrounding Victoria disappeared. She suddenly lifted her gaze, eyes filled with tears, calling out, Sincere! She abruptly stood, lunging forward, waving her hands, desperately trying to grasp something. Sincere! Victoria's chest heaved, her throat hoarse as blood surged, forcing her to cough up blood, staining her white dress. The girl's clear, dark eyes finally dimmed into silence. In the evening, a single standing villa in the outskirts was engulfed in flames and thick smoke. Inside the burning house, Victoria tightly clutched the pendant in her palm, as if holding on to Sincere. Sincere, wait for me, she whispered. When I opened my eyes again, I smelled disinfectant. In the hospital room, a woman smiled and told me she was my wife. I rubbed my aching temples, having no memory of her. According to the woman, I had been recuperating in the hospital for a week. On the morning of my discharge, the bell tied to my wrist came loose, its crisp sound echoing far away. Just as I was about to bend down, another hand reached it before me. The girl's profile was breathtakingly beautiful and familiar, yet I couldn't recall where I had seen her before. She picked up the bell, paused for a moment as she recognized it, then handed it to me with a gentle smile, asking, Hello, is this yours? Extra story. Victoria, my lover is Sincere. I love him dearly, more than anyone else. It seems Sincere never knew that he was my true first love. I owe Ethan a life. Back at the orphanage, he shielded me from a fatal blow, nearly dying because of me. I have no parents, so if I return this life to Ethan, it's not a bad thing. I started treating him well, and gradually my kindness towards Ethan became a habit. Ethan asked me to pretend to be his girlfriend, and I agreed. To me, whether I was in a relationship or with whom didn't make much difference. Until I met Sincere. He thought we met for the first time at a birthday party, even though his feelings were clear on his face. He thought he was being deep and mysterious when he asked me, What's your name? Into my barren, lonely life burst sunlight, carrying the vibrant, lively scent of fresh grass. How could I deserve to be with someone so wonderful? Sincere was my vivid masterpiece. The first time I saw him, my silent heart fluttered. I liked him, yet I was mute, unworthy of him. Later, I lived a dreamlike life. He held me, he kissed me, and I was truly with Sincere. On the day I saved Ethan, I thought I had finally repaid him a life. From then on, my life, my body, my soul, everything belonged solely to Sincere. But after that day, I was uneasy, haunted by nightmares. In those dreadful dreams, my Sincere was dying, helpless, and ultimately consumed by flames. I woke up in a cold sweat, only to realize the nightmare was real. I had fallen into the deepest hell. I didn't mind being in hell, but what about Sincere? He must be in so much pain. I couldn't find him. Let me descend into hell completely. Extra Story 2 System, the creator who brought me into existence, assigned me a task to break up Sincere and Victoria at all costs, turning Victoria into Vicky. In the real world, she couldn't separate them, but in the virtual world, she could. Thus, Sincere and Victoria experienced 10 lifetimes in the cycle system. No matter the lifetime, no matter how opposing their identities, they always ended up falling in love. The creator was furious. In the last lifetime, she meticulously set up a scenario where Victoria had a dependent, cherished figure, yet Sincere still fell for her at first sight. They overcame numerous misunderstandings and finally came together. To make Sincere completely give up, the creator decided to use drastic measures. On the day of the mall fire, my central control system issued a cold command: sever all sensory connections between Victoria and Sincere. Victoria couldn't see Sincere, nor could she hear his cries for help. It was the most tragic death for Sincere in all lifetimes. The creator claimed she loved Sincere dearly. I was puzzled. I'm just a string of data and don't understand love. But is love really like this? Someone once said that love should fear his suffering. If the creator loved Sincere, how could she bear to watch him die so cruelly? The plan succeeded. Sincere's love for Victoria began to crumble due to a tragic death caused by betrayal. I tore them apart, completing my mission. On the night of the inferno, I witnessed Victoria choosing to end her life to find her Sincere. For the first time, my data stream showed meaningless, garbled codes. Back in the real world, I hovered in midair. Sincere was discharged, with the creator by his side. Victoria appeared at the other door of the hospital. They were about to miss each other. My internal data stream again became a mess, beyond scientific calculation. On a whim, I used up my last bit of power on the orange bell of Sincere and Victoria. The knot loosened and love began. Sincere, my little master, I wish you happiness and a life free from pain.